Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining our webinar, Practical Advice and Guidance for Parents, Support Through the Tragedy in Texas. We have Ayelet Shmuel with us from Israel, and we have Dr. Norman Blumenthal with us as well. I'm Dr. Carly Namdar from OHEL's National Trauma Center. We're all devastated and really shaken up by the tragic news of the shooting that occurred this past Tuesday in Uvalde in Texas. And while we all join in praying for a speedy recovery for all those that need it, and we send our prayers and comfort for the bereaved families of the victims, this news is really, really, really hard to deal with. And it's really frightening for our children. And it's something that needs to be processed with them. And we need to process this for ourselves as well. Last night, I was speaking to my own teenage children, and I asked them what they think parents should know about approaching having these kinds of conversations with their children. And both of my kids told me that they want parents to know that their children should really be able to talk to them about anything that happens and really ask them any of the questions that they have. And as a parent, I know it's really hard to have the words and to know what to say to children at times like these, especially when it seems like words can't really talk through the feelings that we might be having. Dr. Viktor Frankl, a famed Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal. And sometimes we kind of wonder to ourselves, maybe there's no one right or wrong way to react to this news. So we're really grateful to have Dr. Norman Blumenthal with us here tonight and Ayelet Shmuel to be able to offer guidance, support, and practical advice to us in how to navigate this topic and how to support us in dealing with these events. You're welcome throughout the presentation. You are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them as they come up. Just a quick bio on Ayelet. Ayelet is a clinical social worker and a psychotherapist living in Ashkelon, Israel. And she experiences the challenges of living in a war-torn area as a professional and as a mother. She's part of the mental health professional team in the Sderot Resilience Center and is one of the leading trainers in emotional first aid, resiliency, and stress management. Ayelet is also one of the head trainers in the Amcha Institute for Holocaust Survivors, and she's a leading parental trainer and advisor in the Center for Children with ADHD. She's also the co-creator of the ATAN model, a practical model for developing and leveraging effective communication and practices during crises and traumatic events. Dr. Norman Blumenthal is a licensed clinical psychologist who serves as the Director of Trauma Services for OHEL Zachter Family National Trauma Center and is an adjunct professor at the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary and Furkhoff Graduate School of Psychology, both of Yeshiva University. He's in private practice in Cedarhurst, New York, and he's also the founder and chairman of the Board of Education for Kahal and a past vice president of Nefesh. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here with us tonight, and a huge thank you to Ayelet. It's the middle of the night for her now in Israel. So I'd like to open up, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'd like to open up with a question. What would you advise parents or educators or significant people in the lives of children in terms of approaching talking to children about the tragic shooting this past week at Robb Elementary School? Let's start first with Ayelet.
Thank you, Carly. So I'm going to use a few examples that we have here in Israel during wartime, because a lot of the times what we hear on the news and the situation on the ground is not the same. And people have been exposed in different levels, right? There's different levels of exposure for families and for children. So what we say to parents is you start with understanding what your kid actually knows, okay? Start there. Figure out what it is that they were exposed to. You definitely don't want to lie to them. And you really want to be able to be that mediator. You don't want them to get educated or to hear about what happened from their peers, because they can learn from a 5-year-old that something happened, or they can learn it from you, okay? So first, know what it is that they know. See, ask a question, and you can really tell. I mean, kids talk, and you can see what it is that they know. Second, mediate it. Really have a conversation with them where you're making sure that the exposure is not larger than it needs to be. And when you do have a conversation with a kid, you make sure that you're, I guess, making a stop or ending any kind of extra exposure. Because right now, this what happened in Texas is on the news 24/7, right? It's constantly going and stories are coming up. You want to kind of stop the exposure at one point, and you want to be that person that is doing it with your kid, but you also want to monitor it all the time because you don't have your kids next to you all the time. It's not 24/7. So when they go and they have social interaction and they come back, you want to have an idea of what happened. So the equivalent in Israel for that is that if we had a rocket that hit a home, okay, and we all went into the bomb shelter because the siren went off, but I didn't experience a bomb falling on my head. I did experience the siren. As a kid, as a parent, I don't want my kid to learn that, a bomb hit his friend's house. I don't want him to learn it from the media. I want him to learn it from me, where I can say something happened at that house, but you know what? They're okay. And they're being taken care of. And right now, everyone is there. And the adults are doing everything that they can to help out, and we have it under control. We want the message to be control and not chaos. So we definitely need to mediate this thing. All right. So.
Okay, Dr. Blumenthal.
So, I think what Mr. Shmuel is saying is very important, that no matter how much we try, we can't understand until we're in the situation. And certainly she's able to combine firsthand experience with knowledge. I'm going to say it a little differently, but I think I'm reiterating what she said. It's sometimes confusing to parents, the change that has taken place with their children. There's sort of a generation gap today between parents and children in terms of acquisition of information and the filtering of information. Most of us, when we were children, the adults were the gatekeepers of information. The adults in our lives, mostly parents, determined what we know and what we don't know. With the advent of the internet and social media, today children can click a mouse and find out anything. So we have lost that role of being the gatekeepers of information. And not only are children finding out information, but there's been a change also in that children feel entitled to know. I can certainly say when I was a child, and I think even for my younger co-presenters, and by the way, just let me thank, Carly reminds me of the comedian said he's going to rewrite his autobiography to include himself. I think we have to thank Carly for orchestrating this in the last minute. But when I was a child, I think most of us were children, there was a sort of unspoken agreement between parents and children that they're not going to tell us and we don't want to know. That's out the window now with the internet. Children feel entitled to know. So we're erring in the direction of telling more, and sometimes painfully so. I can say in the work that we do in the trauma team, there are sometimes information that we're aware of that we wish children didn't need to know, but we want them, they're going to find out anyway. I'll just mention, I've mentioned this probably before, that I actually did it after the Leiby Kletsky murder. I created a mythical figure. I called him the big stupid kid on the bus. I know him well because I raised two of them. And when the question came up about how much to tell you, especially in that case, was a question, do I have to tell my children that the victim unfortunately was dismembered? They said, do I have to tell my child that? So I told them about the big stupid kid on the bus. I told them that's part of their tuition. They pay for a bus, a driver, and a big stupid kid. And that kid's going to go around telling everybody everything. So who do you want them to find it out from? Do you want them to find it out from you or the big stupid kid on the bus? So we are erring in the direction of informing our children. Some children don't want to know. And as long as they know that they can hear from us, we don't have to force it upon them. But if a child wants to know, or if the child is on the fence, we err in the direction of telling them.
Roman, is just such an important point that you're making as far as the media and I think the social network right now that is a social, that is kind of taking over control over what our kids know and the information. I just want to add something as an example. Last year, exactly a year ago, a kid died in Sderot in a bomb shelter. It was was some kind of a direct hit, and he died in a bomb shelter where kids feel safe, like they run to the bomb shelter to feel safe, and he died in one. He did everything right, and he still died. And all the parents felt that they really did not know what to do, because now they're saying, I'm going to tell my kid to run to the bomb shelter and he's supposed to feel safe. He's not going to feel safe. Should I tell them that this kid died? What do I do? And the teachers didn't know what to do with it. I mean, it hit on all levels. And we were talking about the fact that you cannot hide this kind of information, because when you do, you will create a breach of trust between yourself and your kid. You want to make sure that your kid can trust you in times of chaos, that he can say, you know what, whatever it is, I can trust my parent to tell me the truth. So if I'm going to lie to, if as a parent, I was going to lie to my kid and not tell him that a kid died because I want to protect my kid, if he knows about it from somewhere else, from a different school, from a different teacher, then we have a problem in our family, and we're not getting more resilient. We're actually breaking the family's trust, which is huge when it comes to situations like that when crisis, occurs. So an important point. Thanks.
Yeah, if I could ask you each to, or either of you to clarify, how would you approach this conversation with children of different ages? When we talk about adolescents, middle schoolers, elementary school students, high school students, and what could we expect as a reaction from the children if we were to engage in these conversations? Not if, when we engage in these conversations with them.
Who goes first?
I'll
start, and let me start. Okay, I'm going to give you, that's a 2-hour response, but let me give you the Reader's Digest version. Preschool age children are not interested in facts. They need to feel safe. So we really have to impart to them, if they hear about this, and if they know, they probably will, that this is not happening to them. And we don't have to give them facts, statistics. They need to feel safe. And the other thing we have to keep in mind, and this applies to all children, but particularly the younger children, that we communicate as much, if not more, by our voice tone and our body language than the words we use. So first of all, you have to make sure you're feeling okay. And if you think you're fooling your children, you never are. So take care, like the famous parable with putting the oxygen on yourself before you put on the child. Make sure you've plateaued as far as this. Not that you're happy about it, and not that you're not distressed, but it's a situation in which you feel you have ownership and control over before you discuss with your child, and impart that certainty with the manner and with your voice tone, etc. I know when we have to go into a school after a tragedy, I'm very cognizant, especially when I speak to younger children, that I sound almost authoritarian, that I sound confident, because that relieves their anxiety. Elementary school age children are already at a point where they can understand that something is rare. Preschool age children can't. For their whole world is 2 blocks long. So if you tell it's a rare occurrence, it's like saying it's happening all the time. So, but by the time they enter 1st grade, they know what rare means. They also understand a little bit the breadth of the world. So if we tell them that this happened far away, even though it feels like it's happening right in their living room, because again, of the media, they can understand that, and they can understand rare. What we have found with elementary school age children, very often they're interested in facts. So you may get a lot of factual kind of questions. The other thing that's very typical for that age is that you tell them some shocking news and they say, okay, and they run off and play. And then they come back later to sort of acquire information. I always say jokingly, they usually pick the single worst time. You're already late for work and you're throwing on, you have your car keys in your mouth and you're looking for your jacket. That's when they ask you where babies come from. They seem to know the absolute worst time but they come back. They kind of crawl into their cocoon and they come back for more information. The other thing about elementary school age children we found is that they're very into who's right, who's wrong, who wins and who loses. So for them, it's very important that the police did neutralize this killer, and that the police are looking into whether there's any further danger, give them that sense of security. The high school age or adolescents, first of all, they can have a more nuanced understanding. I mean, we may get into later when you try to explain to a child who this murderer is and why he did it, and the adolescent can understand. So with a more nuanced understanding of this, the adolescent also is capable of empathy, so they may very much connect to the family members, and of course the pictures and the media are riveting. and connect to that sense of loss and tragedy than younger children can. And even the adolescent contagion sort of feed off of each other. And the adolescent may try to struggle with the injustice of this. The adolescent will be more, dealing with idealism and how could this happen? How could this, what are the implications? Even if they're, from a religious community, how could God let this happen? That would be much more of an adolescent type of struggle. Okay, I think I said enough.
Well, I want to touch on something. Yeah, I want to touch on some of the stuff that you said. I think the modeling piece of it is very important because the idea is to be able to normalize any kind of a feeling. Okay, so if you're going to have a reaction to it, first things first, right? First, you check yourself. You make sure that you're able to handle that kind of conversation right now. That you're in a good state of mind. Second thing, you speak in the same level, right? That the kid is, right? You're going to be talking to a 4-year-old like a 4-year-old, and you're going to be talking to a 15-year-old as a 15-year-old. So you adjust the language, tone, and you're going to be confident when you speak. The other thing would be is you want to normalize the fact that we have feelings around this, and it's okay to have them. We're just going to be regulated when we do it. We're not going to go from 0 to 100. If we're going to feel sadness, we're going to give it a name. If we're going to feel fear, we're going to give it a name. We're going to name our feelings because half of the time what's happening is that we hear the news, we have a feeling bottled up in us. We're walking around with this either frustration, like a stomach ache the whole day, and it comes out as irritability, outbursts, right? And we don't really know what's happening to us, but we do know that our world was shaken. Kids don't know how to recognize it. And to be frank, adults don't know how to recognize it half of the time, especially when it's times like these where it's a crisis. So you want to be able to help them. You want to give it a name. You want to say, I'm feeling a little scared. What about you? I'm feeling a little shaken by this thing. My stomach is turning. I'm really, really sad. It's okay to be sad at this time. When are you going to be sad? If not when something like this is happening? Open it up to, bring it up for a discussion. Now, a 4-year-old might look at you and say, yeah, okay, mommy, and walk away. And then he'll come back, just like Norman said, when he's ready. A 15-year-old might be very angry because they have had a lot of school shootings pointed into, for their, at their age, targeted at their age. So they will say something. They're saying, you know what, I'm scared. I don't want to be scared when I go to school. Okay. It's okay to feel it, talk it out, and wait it out. And one of the things that parents usually do is they lecture rather than listen. You wait it out. Don't be scared to allow your kids to say something about these feelings. Just wait it out another 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because what happens usually is they say what they feel. If you let them, they'll say, and then they run out of it. And then it can calm down, okay? And then you can go to the flip side of it, which is, what do you want to do about it? So right now you're feeling like this. What would help? What usually helps you when you're feeling like this, when you're this frustrated, when you're this sad? What helps, right? You go for the strength. You go for the, what do? You go for bringing back the control, because a chaotic situation like that, a crisis like that, really takes away your control and everybody feels helpless. So you normalize it, you allow a talk about feelings, you let them name it, and then you move on to the next step. And the next step is always, what do you want to do about it right now? What would make you feel good? Okay, what will make you feel better? And it's not necessarily to solve it. Sometimes it's to allow a kid to, I don't know, I want to make a drawing and I want to send it into Texas. Okay, I want to draw my fear and I want to put it there for a second. Maybe I want to do something within the community. Maybe I want to raise money. I don't know. Everybody has a different idea, but you want to make sure that you're going to do a call for action to move away as a family or as a kid, to move away from the helplessness. Okay. So it's like really like it's structured. We do it all the time in Sderot and in Ashkelon with our own kids, because a lot of this situation where we have like 1,000 rockets falling on our head, we really feel like we're helpless half of the time. And the question is always, and when kids call and they say, I don't know, I'm scared. I'm like, okay, it's okay to feel scared. If you're not going to feel scared when the bomb is falling, when are you going to feel scared? It's okay to feel scared. What else are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling sad because I feel like I'm not getting out of the situation. Okay, let's sit with it for 5 seconds. What do you want to do about it? What will make you feel better right now? Right? So that's my piece of advice. We do it And usually when it's the first 48 hours or when it's in a crisis mode, when it's in acute stress, we sit less in emotions, more in action. But when it's processing after an event, we actually allow feeling those feelings and then moving for action. Okay, so we really distinguish between two situations where it's acute stress and we want to make sure that somebody is not helpless and is not sitting in his feelings, naming them and moving on. And when it's after the fact, when it's a process, then you're saying, okay, let's normalize it. Let's let that happen. But we have to make sure that the parents are able to model it. They need to be able to be confident themselves to say, you know, my stomach is turning because comes next week, I have to send my kid to camp. What do I do? How do I send them to summer camp feeling okay that I can do this? I mean, you have to name it for yourself, because if you're going to model it, kids are going to smell it. They are very good at knowing exactly what's happening for you, even if you think that you're fooling them.
Thank you. Thank you. I know Tal Ben Shachar speaks about the idea of our emotions flow through a pipeline, right? And we want to make sure that we allow ourselves to experience all emotions and that we model that for our children so that we can experience what we're going through. And sometimes just by naming it, that really is so, so helpful. So I want to ask a question. If a child, I know children can react and children of different ages can react in different ways. And if a child asks the question, why did he do that? Or even if a child asks the question, you know, like, why do things like this happen? Children of different ages can ask questions like that. How would you advise parents on what to answer their children?
So for me, I'm big on telling kids really, why do you ask? I don't give answers, okay? Because I don't know them. I don't pretend to know everything, you know? But what I do usually is if somebody asks that, I tell them, you know, I was thinking the same thing. I was wondering the same thing. What do you think? Because if he's asking, that means something is on his mind. And he already has speculations. And I want to hear those speculations. That's what I'm interested in, right? I'm not interested in giving him my spiel about what I think about the world. So, and I know in religious world, it's a little different, but usually the way I do things is I ask, now that you're asking this question, I wonder too. So what do you think? What are the options? And usually when that happens, when a kid tells you what he thinks is going on, you will see his worries. He's spreading his worries right there in front of you. And he says, here's what's happening for me on the inside. And usually it will tell you what is the view of the world is at the moment, okay? Is there control right now? Or are we release the control? Am I really, really scared because I feel like no one is in charge, or all that stuff? Or there are cracks in my belief system, or whatever it is. And again, the most important piece of it is allowing a conversation, because once you allow them to talk about something, even if eventually you're going to lead them to where you want them to be, the fact that they put it out there is super helpful. That ventilation, that place, that safe spot where they can say what they feel and talk about their worries. This is it's gold when it comes to situations like that. And then you'll see a kid that is less irritable, and the behaviors are going to shift if they're showing and exhibiting some disturbing behaviors. But I would allow that conversation and not give an answer.
Yeah.
Okay. We actually, well, first of all, I want to say the question is, why did he do it? I think it's often a very different question when an 8-year-old asks it and when a 16-year-old asks it. Usually when the younger child is asking it, they're looking for safety. If they can understand why he did it, maybe they'll feel safer that somebody else won't do it to them. The older child, who is already dealing in the world of concepts and morality, etc., may really ask it in a sense to try to understand what's the psyche, what's the psychology of somebody that would want to do something like this. There is really two strains of thought. In fact, it was actually reflected in an article today in the Wall Street Journal, though we've talked about this for many years. There's two strains of thoughts of how to explain people like this kind of person who's a school shooter. And it's a little different here in the States than I think in Israel. In Israel, a lot of the attacks are very much grounded in a conflict and ideology, etc. But in here, where we don't have that as much of that, conflict. So one approach is to say that he's sick. Now, that has shortcomings. Also, both sides have shortcomings. The shortcoming of saying that he's sick, first of all, you have to be very careful, especially with young children, that you make it clear you're not talking about sick that goes on in most of their life. I don't want the child to think that because the kid down the block is sneezing and sniffling, that now he's becoming a school shooter, that it's a mental illness, it's a sickness in the head. That's one concern. But the other concern also is, I mean, two more concerns. The other concern is also that we don't want to give over the impression that people with a mental illness are dangerous, and they really aren't. And so I think it's important with this qualifier that even though he may have been deranged, this doesn't mean that people with mental illness are no more dangerous than anyone else, and we don't want people with mental illness to be stigmatized or in any way persecuted against because of some misconception that they're dangerous. The other thing about, which is interesting, maybe more philosophically and theologically than psychologically, if you're saying he's sick, then you're taking away any kind of personal responsibility. You know, and there's a big question as we understand human behavior better. Are we losing the concept of an evil person? Are we losing the concept that our moral compass off? You know, did Osama bin Laden come from a broken home? Did Charles Manson, was he bullied when he was a child? And we can excuse anything. So that's the problem with saying that the person was sick. The alternative position is to the more traditional one is to say he's evil. Now, we're not comfortable today with labeling people in that fashion, so it's not as current in terms of thinking, but not to say that, I mean, just to say that he's an evil person. But if we say, again, that he's an evil person, we don't want children to think that the world is overly populated with evil people. We have to assure the child that the vast majority of the human population are kind and well-intended and law-abiding people. So those are the two strains of approaches. With younger children, you have to take sort of one or the other. Older children, you can start talking, as I said, with teenagers, you can have a more nuanced approach that, yes, he was disturbed, but then there was a responsibility to get help and to help himself and to have some sort of mixture. In terms of, you know, what's called in philosophy theodicy, which I think is what's behind your question about, you know, why bad things happen to good people, in Hebrew Tzadik Rala Rasho V'Tovlo, that's not really a question for elementary school age children. Elementary school age children aren't trying to figure out justice and you know, why God does whatever God does. That's very much of an adolescent, and when we have to come and do an intervention in a elementary school, we don't really get confronted with that much. But if we have to do an intervention because of a tragedy in a high school, that's very much going to be that unanswerable question, as Ayelet indicated. And we have a tradition in Judaism that Moses asked God that question, and he said, I can't tell you. So that unanswerable question but again, teenagers can tolerate the idea of a question being unanswered. I think it's an important point that Ayelet said in terms of understanding the question. I was reminded as she was talking of a question I got when we went to Pittsburgh after the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, and we were actually in the schools, in the day schools afterwards, and a middle school teacher, a rabbi in the middle school, came to me with a question that one of his kids asked him, which was, now that it happened, anyone else with such inclinations, any other kind of Jew hater, violent Jew hater, now is going to feel a greater license to go ahead and do this himself. So are we in greater danger? Which I thought was a very legitimate question. We do know that there is such a thing as copycatting. So so the child was asking not only a question that reflected his own sense of vulnerability, but something that made sense, and that probably statistically is true. So what I suggested that he answer him is yes, but the police know that too. And therefore they'll be more on the lookout for these kind of people. So again, it's understanding the fear behind the question and addressing it not by distorting reality, but saying, no, it's not true. There aren't more people. That's probably not the case, but to find some way, and that's realistic, to give the child a sense of safety.
I just want to add something to that because I think it's super important, because parents are going to have to answer these kind of questions. And I'm going to put my therapy hat here for a second, and I'm going to give parents a piece of advice. Every time somebody asks you something, look at it as an assessment tool. So when somebody's saying something, this is my way to assess where my kid is at. Like, this is how I assess my clients, right? If a client is asking me something like this, how can something like this happen to good people? Why would God make it happen? I am going to go for, why are we asking that question, right? What does that tell me about the person's state of mind, his worries, his concern, where he's at? If you're going to take that little tool and use it with your children, when somebody's saying, when are we going to grandma? And I'm going to say 9 o'clock. And he's going to come 5 minutes later and he's going to say, when are we going to grandma's? And I'm going to say, I said 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And then he's going to ask the third time, when are we going to grandma? That means to me that when are we going to grandma is not when are we going to grandma. He's saying something else, right? He really wants to see her. He can't wait. He's super excited, or he's really worried we're going to be late. I mean, there's something in that question, right? So we want to learn to listen to what our kids are saying and to kind of be able to have a window into their minds, into their hearts like that, instead of just assuming that they really are looking for a solid answer from us. Sometimes it's just their way to say, hey, super confused, help me out here. And I can say to my kid, and I do that a lot as a mother, especially in this crazy time, in Israel. We just had a crazy terror, wave here in Israel. And the world did not make sense here to kids. Think about it this way. I can tell you a little anecdote about my own son, and he's a 16-year-old, he's in 10th grade, an American, a former American, right? And we moved to Israel about 4 years ago, and from Colorado, and we're not used to this, and now we are. Now we're immersed in the culture and understanding what's going on. And during this terror wave, the kids were not feeling safe. They were not feeling safe to walk home from school. So they found a way to do that. They found a solution that worked for them. They decided to go together. So they went in groups. They were taking each other home in groups, and the boys were walking the girls home. And it took my kid 2 hours to come home that day because they wanted to make sure, and that worked for them. And then when we were having the conversation, he said, this world doesn't make any sense to me. I said, no, it does not right now, but what's on your mind? What doesn't make sense to you, right? That it can come from anywhere, that I don't feel safe. Okay, well, how was it that you walked today for a couple of hours? How was that? Well, actually, I felt safe there. Okay. So you give them a window, you allow that, and then you go in with the strength and with the resources and what worked for you, because something that he did actually worked for him, right? Something that he did was a strength for him, and we're going to jump on that. And it's, again, another way to create a call for action, even in the midst of fear or in the midst of these crazy questions that are very valid right now.
Right. I want to encourage the audience, if anybody here wants to pose a question, just please put it in the Q&A and we'll be able to ask our panelists here. So we've been hearing a lot about this idea of, it's called remote exposure trauma. Dr. Leah Waters, who just recently did a webinar for us, has written a lot about it, and that children can actually experience really adverse effects from the trauma that they watch from afar, from what they see on social media, from what they watch on the news. And sometimes when kids are kind of glued to their phones and their social media, it's almost like the more they watch, the more it just keeps happening for them. And it's almost like the event is running on repeat. What do you think about this? What's your take on, helping parents navigate technology and dealing with events like this and the exposure that children can have?
It's my friend's turn to go first. Okay. So this, I often talk about we learn in history about the Industrial Revolution, which took place in the, late 18th, early 19th century, where people left farms and moved to the city. There was steam energy, and there was international trade, mass production, factories, and how it changed the world. We're living today in a different revolution. We're living in the age of the technology revolution. And I think when the history books will be written, that the Industrial Revolution will be a footnote compared to how the world is changing because of the technology revolution. It's changing everything. And I think we're in the middle of it, so we really can't even fully appreciate it. But one of the ways in which it's changing the world is it's changing how we get information, and specifically how we get news. And the news, first of all, is happening very quickly. It's very graphic. It's appearing right in our bedrooms, living rooms, dens, with a sense of immediacy, which creates a sense that this is happening close by and it's happening at greater frequency than it really does. The other thing that's happening is that there's not a handful of news media that are presenting the news. There's hundreds and hundreds of forums and platforms, and all competing to grab our attention. So of course, the more sensational they can be, the more they're going to grab our attention. And the solution is not to throw away the smartphones and to go back to rotary phones and 3 television stations with news. The challenge for educators and parents today is to teach our children how to use this medium, how to, first of all, understand the impact and how it's maybe distorting our perception, and how to understand how to make sure to check the sources of news information and how to also contain it. And Nayela referred to that earlier, that not to be flooded and not to be inundated, that you get the information and you have to step away from it and reflect on it a little bit. And so really it's part of our responsibility as parents and adults today to teach our children how to use this medium, to use it with them, and show them this process of really, in essence, our using it, not letting it invade and take over our world. But it's certainly a risk in a situation like this, that for the child is going to create a distortion of the frequency and the immediacy of this kind of violence. And one case is one too many. But in terms of having a realistic sense of safety and danger, it could distort that, and then it behooves us to help correct that potential distortion.
Yeah, that is
on that one and say, first, be assertive. You have a job as a parent, and your job is to protect your kids. When it comes to situations like that, you do not have to see this footage again and again and again. Really be mindful of that, because it is harmful. And the media is not doing us any favors. I can say that in Israel, and I can say that in the US. When it comes to crises like this and chaotic times, they overexpose. They create overexposure for everyone, and it could mess with people's heads, because it's YouTube's and it's this and footages from everywhere, from everybody's phones and everybody. Too much information. When we have rockets hit here, sometimes they will show the same hit again and again and again on the news. And for kids, the perception is that multiple homes are being, hit, and it distorts everything. So the first thing that you do is you reframe it. You make sure that the kid understands that the event started at one point and ended at another point. So you really keep on reframing it and making sure they understand that the story has ended. That's one. Two, be very assertive about how much, about the use of the phones and the use of TV and exposure in the home for yourself as well. You can't tell them to stop being on the phone, but be on the phone yourself, right? You can't tell them, hey, I don't want you watching the news, but the news is going to be on in the living room. So modeling is a big key here. Another thing is, I would ask them, I would redirect them, get busy with looking for things in that story that were heroic. Look for the courage, look for the heroic stories, look for the people that made it stop, okay? Don't go just for the victim piece of it. Go for the heroic stories. There's a reason why we have these stories. There's a reason why we cling into them as cultures, okay? Those are the big stories that everybody wants to talk about, because that's what makes us feel resilient. It makes us feel like there was some kind of a control here. Well, this shooter, somebody actually took him on, right? Somebody actually went into that school and stopped it. There were stories, I'm sure, within that school, and the media is probably already exposing all of it. Go for that. Find that human angle, okay? Find that positive human angle. So if you're gonna send them into media land and YouTube land, go at least give them good direction. Okay, of what worked, because something did work, because it did stop. It didn't kill 300 kids. Eventually it stopped. I'm not saying, oh, great, let's reframe it as a success story. That's not what I'm saying. But there was something heroic that happened there. There were people that got there and actually helped a lot of people. If it's first responders from here and there, look for their stories and kind of reframe it in some way that people can stomach it.
right. So we have a question that just came in. What do you say to a child who says they can't stop thinking about it and their mind keeps circling back to what happened?
Well, it's normal. First, it's normal. It's normal to have an event, a traumatic event in that magnitude, and for that to be kind of occupying your brain. That is normal. And then I would want to ask. So first I would normalize it, and then I would say, okay, which part do you keep circling back to? Because here's the thing, kids are going to say, I keep thinking about the whole thing all the time. It keeps on coming all the time. And I bet you anything that if you pinpoint it, and if you're going to be accurate with the child, there's one part, there's one piece that keeps on coming to his brain. There's one thing that worries him the most. Go for that. All right. So you want to zoom in. You don't want to keep it in big, sentences, in big storylines. I want to pinpoint it, because once you do, it is smaller. It's contained. This you can handle. This you can't. All right. So what is it exactly? Where do you go back in that story? Let's sit here for a second. Why is it turning your stomach? There's something about that story that makes this kid kind of going back to it. And then you want to give them back. First, name your feeling. Second, start looking at what you can do. What do you want to do about it? Let's say I feel anxious about this. Maybe the fact that I'm keep on repeating and going for the story is because I'm super anxious. Okay, you're anxious. We gave it a name. That's good. What do you want to do about your anxiousness? Because the kid needs to know that he has control over himself and over his body. So first, I will give some psychoeducation. Stress sits in the body. It does. It sits in the body. We're going to feel it all over the place. We sometimes we lose some kind of a control of our cognition. We get confused. We can't make good decisions sometimes when we're stressed, right? Stress sits in the body, so we can feel it in the body. We can feel stomach ache, we can hard to breathe, all that stuff. So we're going to ask them to say, where is it in your mind? Where is it in your feelings? Where is it in your body? Now, what do you want to do about it? Maybe we go for a walk. Maybe we do something physical. Maybe we draw something, okay, that makes you kind of take it out in a different way. But we don't let them get stuck in that cycle of, I can't get it out of my mind. Okay, that's too big. All right, so pinpoint it, let them talk, give it a name, go for the cognitive, emotional, physical, and then call for action. What do you want to do about it? How are you going to move away from that? How can I help? And what are we going to do together? One last point. When kids say stuff like that, you do not want to make them feel like they're alone in this. Because the minute you feel alone in these kind of situations, your helplessness or your feeling of crisis just goes up. I'm looking for a word and I'll find it in a second. But so you want to make sure that the kid doesn't feel like he's alone in this. So you're in it for the ride, you're doing it with him, and you're going to figure it out, and then you're going to move him to action.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something, just a similar point. We have to remember that anxiety is a fear. And the antidote to fear is to be active. So sometimes if a child is stuck, and I agree that we have to pinpoint what part of it, because we get stuck because something we can't solve. So, but if a child is stuck, sometimes it's good to give them something to do. Now, to do doesn't mean necessarily going out and, learning how to shoot a firearm or learning karate or something like that. But even if it's some spiritual activity, maybe if it's just writing, as was mentioned earlier, perhaps sending a picture, writing a letter to the family. But activity is very often an antidote to anxiety. I just want to add one more point, which I think doesn't get addressed enough, and it's sort of the flip side of some of our focus, which is we're very focused on scared children, on children getting anxious. I think it's important to know that some children are not anxious enough and not impacted enough. And, we do live in an increasingly dangerous world, and some vigilance is indicated. And therefore, we can sometimes have very often it's a dysregulated kid, the ADHD kid, who is not scared enough or is not upset enough. We want to teach our children to have sympathy, to have empathy, to feel for the people in Uvalde. So sometimes if a child has a more dismissive approach or is not distressed enough, we might want to sort of just, introduce to them, not in any way penalize them or punish them, but introduce to them the idea that this is something very serious. This is something we have to internalize. We have to internalize it not only because of our care and concern for other people who are suffering terribly, we have to internalize it for our own safety, that there is a level of vigilance that's appropriate to whatever danger exists. So we have to look at it at both sides of the extremes.
Right. Okay, so we hear that, giving a child a sense of agency and really, preventing that looping can really make all the difference. And I think it's important to think now we're almost in June, we're about to enter into the summer. And I think it's important to think about, and Ayala touched on it briefly before, going into the summer, how can we really give our children a sense of safety, a sense of reassurance, and how do we empower them with that sense of agency for themselves?
Well, I guess it's my turn to go first. Okay, so summer poses some unique dangers, and one of the challenges of sending your kid to camp is because while there's, as I mentioned before, we're living in a largely safe world, thank God, but there are dangers, but there's unique dangers in camp. Camp children do more risky things. They're going to be swimming, they're going to be climbing, they're going to be hiking. So some safety, just general safety measures. And by the way, if you have a child who comes from a more urban area and they're going to spend, and they're of driving age and they're going to be driving the country, it's extremely important that you teach them and instruct them the unique aspects of driving the country, because certainly many vehicular accidents, some of them having terrible consequences, are a result of children not being sufficiently familiar with driving on country roads or driving at night, in particular on country roads. So there's unique dangers. There's also, you have a child-centered world. So the child-centered world is, first of all, the less adult supervision, or even the supervisors are sometimes themselves children, but also children may feel very empowered because it's like Candyland. It's a child world. So again, recognizing potential risks, dangers becomes very important. But it's also important to do that intermingled with an appreciation of what the summer is. Summer is a very important time, a time of replenishment, a time of perfecting skills, athleticism, swimming, endurance. And it's a time to relax and to be relieved of academic pressure as well. So when we talk about potential dangers, and I have to add, because it's extremely important, and one of them is any kind of sexual abuse. Very often that may happen, especially peer-to-peer in camp. But as we prepare children for dangers, it can't be the only thing we talk about, because we don't want the child going to camp with a sense of terror. We have to also share with them, intermingled in the conversation, a sense of what a blessing it is to have this opportunity, and what a wonderful time it is to solidify friendships, to replenish oneself, to enjoy the spirit and the excitement of a camp that has a lot of child-centered activities and many that are important, developing, enhancing social skills. So it should be that mixed message. Oh, you're muted, Carly. You're muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
We have a few questions coming in from the audience. What if a child is afraid that this will happen in his or her school? How can we prevent them from feeling unsafe?
Well, it's very valid. It's a very valid concern. I mean, I can tell you that last May, we had a full-blown war here in Israel for 11 days. And a day after we ceased fire, we didn't get a peace agreement, but we ceased fire. We asked our kids to go back to school. And what we've been telling them for 11 days is that this area right here, from your house to the school that you usually walk, that was dangerous for 11 days. You cannot leave the house. And a day after, within 24 hours, we're telling them, sure, you can go now. Good. It's safe. Have a great day, right? And some of the kids are saying, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. This is not safe. So what we've learned is there's such a thing with acute stress that is called avoidance, okay? We don't really want to do anything that we think is going to get us in danger, in any kind of a dangerous situation, right? So we avoid places, we avoid talking about these topics, we avoid people that we think are unsafe for us, right? So avoidance is key. And a lot of the times we realized here in Israel that we need to allow time. We need to give it a minute. So it's gradually gonna be okay. There is a natural curve of healing that happens. But it's okay for a kid to say, hey, this crazy thing just happened at a school. You want to tell me that I'm safe? You want to guarantee it? No, you can't. But what you can say is that you can allow that a lot of people feel the same way. You normalize it. A lot of people feel the same way. And they really don't want to go to school and they really don't want to do some things. But a lot of times what happens is that life is stronger than anything. And there's a natural healing that happens. And you'll see that eventually the kid that says, I am not going to the soccer field. I am not going back to after school activities and playing soccer. Are you crazy? There was a war here 5 seconds ago. A week after, the kid is already there because he's a kid and he knows the value of soccer, right? He knows the value of being a kid. Eventually life is stronger. So give it a minute. Expect the kids to have a reaction. It is normal. One thing that I wanted to say before and I forgot is that we all know our kids and we want to measure their behaviors through the baseline, meaning how do I know my kid usually? Like, let's say my kid is very active and very social. So he really likes doing things and going places. And after this, a rocket here in Israel, or after a terror attack, or after a school shooting, he doesn't want to leave the house. He's in his room. He doesn't want to leave the house. The mood is not so great. And he really is avoiding. So you measure your kid through the baseline, right? So this is usually him. This is him right now. So now I know I have a problem. And if I know that I have something, I can say, you know, I've noticed that since the shooting, you've kind of been like this and that. But again, put it in perspective and reframe it. It's only been, what, 72 hours?
Right.
It just feels like it didn't end because the media is making it as if the crisis itself is not over.
Right.
But really, you want to reframe it. It ended 3 days ago. And then we have some time for healing. It is normal to feel like that. It is normal to want to avoid at the beginning. And
Right.
then you also go for the kids' strengths. Go for what they're good at. Go for the things that work for them. I know usually that for you, when you're feeling stressed or you're feeling down, going outside and playing is super helpful. I know I can see that you're not up for it right now. If you want me to go with you, I will. Because a parent is an anchor, super helpful for kids, especially when they're young. But if you want to do it on your own, that's fine. But remember that you have a strength. Remember that you know something that works for you in these kind of times. But allow that natural healing. Allow that minute for avoidance. We see it in Sderot and in Ashkelon all the time, that sometimes it takes a kid about 3 weeks to go back to normal, okay? And I think if the parents are not anxious, if the parents are able to hold it and to say there is a natural healing for the parents themselves, because as a parent in the US, I know how nervous we can be when it comes to school shootings. So if you are nervous about sending them, then you need some time to heal yourself. It's okay to not be like, yay, sure, we're back in business in 5 minutes. It's okay to say, I think I need a minute here. I'm also not feeling self. I also am a little nervous. It's okay to say that, to allow that. Give yourself time to heal. You know, we're not robots. We're not supposed to do it like that.
Our time is almost up. We have another question that's come in, Dr. Blumenthal, if you could perhaps help us answer it. If a child hasn't heard about the events at all at ages 6, 9, or 12, should we bring it up to them?
So I would have said 20 years ago, no. I think if we get back to the big stupid kid on the bus, they're going to hear about it. And if they're going to hear about it, I want them to hear about it from a responsible person. So I do think it's sufficiently viral that I think we'd have. Now, if the child, tell the kid and say, I don't want to know, okay, at least you did. And David Pelkowitz likes to talk about attenders and distractors.
Right.
And some kids are attenders and some kids are distractors. Some adults are attenders, some adults are distractors. And if your child's a distractor, let them distract. But at least you did your due diligence by letting them know. And, I think Ayala mentioned this a few times, and I think it's extremely important to repeat it. Nobody knows your child better than you do. I don't care how many doctorates somebody has. And read your child, read their reaction. And look at don't just look at the verbal responses, look at their body language, look at their facial grimaces, and you'll know whether they need to hear more, want to hear more now or not. And as I mentioned earlier, they may just not want to hear about it now, and then 2 weeks from now, when everybody else has forgotten about it, they're going to come into your bedroom in the middle of the night, again, usually when you finally fell asleep, and tell you that they're having nightmares about it, and they need to process it then.
Okay, all right.
I want to make one last point. I know
Sure.
we need to finish. Just a general thing. We all want to fix it for our kids, and we all want to protect them all the time. We can't always do that. The world is what it is these days, okay? And we want to ask ourselves always the bigger question. What am I trying to get here? What is my goal? When I interact with my kid after an event like this, what is my goal? Do I not want him to feel anything? Well, that's not normal, right?
Right.
Do I want him to be protected and shielded from the world? That's not going to happen either. So you want to be very realistic, but really ask yourself the question, we cannot fix it for them. And that is the hard realization. And we cannot protect them from all illnesses of the world. We can teach them to use their resources. We can teach them to say how they feel. We can teach them to pay attention to their body, to pay attention, to be aware of what's coming out of their mouth, to be aware of the fact that they're healing, to be aware of their strengths. We can teach them that. We cannot control the outside world as parents as much as we want to. I don't know a parent that doesn't want to protect his kid. So as parents, really be kind to yourselves. Be kind to yourselves, because these situations are not normal. We're not supposed to get used to them. But when you're in a situation like that, say, okay, I'm going to give him something. I'm going to give him the ability to actually do this. I'm going to give him the resiliency piece of it, so he can use it when he's older. He can use it when he's a parent, rather than try to fix it for him and protect him from the world. And I think that's the bigger message here.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining our webinar tonight. We hope that, thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. Thank you, Ayelet. It's the middle of the night for you in Israel, so we really appreciate it, and we hope you can get some rest. And thank you, our audience, for signing in, and we hope that this has been supportive to you. Please God, this will go up on our website, and feel free to reach out to OHEL if there's anything that you need, or if we can support you in any way. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.